This teaching is in dedication to Barack Hussein Obama never reaching a next term, not winning, not winning at all. That's right, punk. All right. What I'm gonna teach here is four general levels. Um, their heights, measuring. You could say the more of the measuring rules of this level, the measuring ruler. I mean. Um, so I guess this is going to be more of an explanation of the greatness of these heights according to the measuring ruler, to knowing what's actually great, and which would basically, by the way, resolve lots of doubts that people have had when it comes to being a great man, particularly in the Judaism area. When they say, "Oh, I'm not like him," or "He's too big," or he's great," or whatever. We're going to get into what the Torah says is great, and you'd be surprised how a young kid would be able to match the greatness of a 65-year-old, for example, studying all his life, doing lots of things. It's possible. It's very possible. All right. So there are four general levels that a person is on. The highest, of course, pardon me, of course, the highest, of course, which is that of Moshe Rabbeinu. The second level is that of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. The third level is that of the 12 tribes. The fourth level is the 70 that come out of the 12 tribes. And speaking of Moshe, what I want to say about, as far as being like him, the ability of being like him, or whatever, as it says, all Jews contain the spark of Moshe. And also says of, let's say, of a Jewish person who, for example, who uses all of his capacity and everything he is, all that's his entire being, uses it all for God, the Torah says, is like Moshe, as the Talmud somewhat describes. Now, there's something, there's an idea that lots of people are missing out on. I mean, people look down on themselves about, which is quite foolish. There's something that goes into a measure for measure level, like maybe boxing likes to call pound for pound, arm wrestling likes to call pound for pound. So what's a measure for measure or pound for pound? Measure for measure, pound for pound, same thing. That is, let's say, maybe arm wrestling. You got somebody in the lowest weight class who could be as great as somebody in the highest weight class, which usually should be the best arm wrestlers, which is the highest weight class, for example. So the featherweight, who's ranked as great as the super heavyweight, for example, is pound for pound the best. The superweight, of course, the champion, ranked the best in that weight class, is the best on a made level. So what we're getting into is a pound for pound or a measure for measure level to a made level. And this example is just in arm wrestling or sport, not in life. We'll get into that. It's just an example. A good example is really like this when it comes to life. Say bodybuilding, for example. You have a child bodybuilder who, in his own respects, does the very same thing to the amount of his ability that a grown bodybuilder does to himself. That's the same amount. Now, a child bodybuilder might bench 100 pounds, for example, or a grown bodybuilder could bench 500 pounds. So, as the child is growing, if he keeps going on this pathway, he's going to be just like the grown bodybuilder who could bench 500 pounds. So the child is on the measure for measure level, pound for pound, in the sports term. So, versus the one on the made level who's going at 500 pounds. The same thing when it comes to greatness, the same thing when it comes to life. It's the manifestation versus what it represents when it's already fulfilled. So you keep going that same pathway, it's going to get there eventually. Like we have, let's say, for example, when it came to being a warrior, you'd have little David at 12 years old at a measure for measure level, pound for pound level, measure for measure level, as a warrior, as a youngster, defeating Goliath, who's been trained since youth on a made level, serious shit. So, but at the moment of battle, obviously obviously little David at 12 years old represented what a king should be like when nobody else steps up to the plate. On his measure for measure level, he was greater than Goliath was on his made level. On his Goliath grown level, King David measure for measure level. Pound for pound. The same example as a child bodybuilder versus the grown bodybuilder. As the Torah says, this is a great example. He prayed for a miracle, etc., etc. So the stone went through the protective area that was covered, hit Goliath right on the button. Goliath went down. He took Goliath's sword, his own sword. He took the sword of Goliath, cut his head off, and he showed what a king is all about on a made level, from his measure for measure level. That's a great example. People are saying, I'm not like that, I'm not like that. That's where it goes. To the made level.